I'm sorry if I'm too basic, both on like ideas of like feminism and about PETA and about other stuff, because I just want to make sure that everybody understands what I'm talking about and where I'm coming from. And where I'm going with this, as you'll see as I go through it, is that often PETA is accused of being sexist. And even people who say that they like PETA and they think it's successful still think that the strategies themselves are sexist, even if effective. And where I'm going with this is I think a lot of this comes from an anti-sex work bias in society and in feminism and against women being able to be sexual themselves. And that if you look at the critiques of PETA as sexist, it follows a lot of critiques of sex work. And that I thought the really big problem is that people weren't talking to women in PETA who were doing these sexy demonstrations, and they weren't asking them if it fit in with feminism for them, if they considered themselves to be feminist, where they thought all this was going. And for total disclosure, I've done some of the sexy, semi-nude PETA demonstrations where like you dress up as, I was a lion once against a fur demonstration and things like this. And before I did it, I thought that PETA was sexist, but my friend runs part of the sexy demonstrations, and she told me that I should just try it and like it, and I had lots and lots of hesitancies, and through my own experience with it, I ended up feeling really empowered and really moving past feeling like PETA was sexist myself. I don't really do the image though, it's blue, if it doesn't bother you guys, or... Anyway. Okay. I can even do it like this. So, what I'm going to do first is I'm just going to talk about the way in general speciesism and sexism have been linked together as interlocking oppressions with a lot of other different things going on. Then I'm going to talk about the way that people have talked about sexism and animals and how all these things are related. And then I'm going to turn to the way that PETA in its ads and websites talks about sexism, about interviews with Ingrid Newkirk, who's the president and founder of PETA, and about interviews that I did with people who put on sexy demonstrations and are in sexy demonstrations. And then I'm going to go through the critiques to PETA as sexist really quickly, and I'm going to talk about how women in PETA themselves counter these critiques, and about how PETA sees its use of sexual images. Like this side, for example, this is my friend Rachel on this side, how PETA sees its use of sexual images, because it completely agrees that these are sexual images, as something that's both working to end oppression of animals and to counter sheets of sexism. And I'm lastly going to talk about the way that these critiques remind me personally of anti-sex work critiques. And all the time, I just want to keep in mind that I think it's really important to talk to the women that are doing these ads and the men that are doing these ads and see what people in them have to say. And instead of taking this step back and being like, I'm seeing these like, I think this is sexist, I know. At least give a chance to the people who are doing this, who really deeply care about animals and really often really deeply care about issues of sexism, to let their voices come out. So that's the whole point of this. So, the recognition of the ties between the treatment of women and animals isn't something new right now, and especially in feminist discourse from the 70s, 80s, and 90s. We've been talking about the links between gender and sex and sexuality and oppression of non-human animals. And Carol J. Adams' The Sexual Politics of Meat is always cited as a really seminal work on this. And there's this new book too, which I'm going to talk about, called Sister Species, Women, Animals, and Social Justice by Lisa Kemmerer, which really talks about the interlocking oppressions between speciesism and so many other things. And she talks about speciesism as a normative, systematic oppression. And the essays in this book, including one at Ingrid Newkirk, talk about the interaction between sexism, racism, heterosexism, classism. There's a lot of connections between homophobia, capitalism, militarism, and ideas of connecting trauma and especially sexual violence. There's a lot of ideas when we get to these kind of discourses about false dualities, and for example, how there was this constructed nature of colored versus white, which is the same as the constructed nature that we get between human versus animal. And other people discuss similar challenges between mothers living in poverty, whether they're human or non-human, and the challenges of mothering in situations like this. There's a lot of links between child abuse and speciesism, a lot of which is about cultural invisibility and things that we don't even get brought to the surface to have discourse about. And then there's the legal work, which I'm not really interested in, about how we're classifying groups and whether it's non-property owners, racial minorities, or non-human animals, and how groups are classified as the other. And then once you're the other, then you get less legal protection. So the point of this is just that when we're talking about the way that speciesism is linked to sexism and so many other oppressions, there's so many different ways to get at this issue. And if we look at the ways that Ingrid Newkirk, who's the founder, co-president of PETA, talks about these issues, she identifies with a lot of similar things in these feminist critiques of the way that we treat non-human animals, including refusing essentialism and differentiation between women and men. In several interviews and in this book, Sister Species, Newkirk talks about the problems with her being identified as a woman at all, and that she thinks that compartmentalization, be it as woman or man, human or animal, is the root of all evil, having, in her words, contributed enormously to discrimination. She draws similarities between the taming and grooming of girls and animals from the 18th century to present times, and how these ideas of grooming of girls and animals really arose similarly, especially in Western Europe. And the ways that nationalism and how nationalism has evolved leads to us identifying ourselves in exclusive ways, be it I'm an American or I'm a human. And she talks about how the term woman gets tied exclusively to sex and reproductive organs, which has led to the subjugation of female human and non-humans as baby incubators, as the carrier of men's seed, and biblical ideas that we get also, right? And for like a long time, until we had more current scientific research, people didn't realize that women had eggs at all. It was that women are a vessel for men's seed, and she sees this being similar if you're looking at females, humans and non-humans. And that she talks about how in factory farming animals, the vast majority of factory farm animals are women and treated in the most horrifying ways because of the reproductive systems. And that way she thinks that almost everyone she works for is female. And Newkirk says that the central goal of her advocacy is rejecting all classifications as much as we possibly can, and demand to be part of something bigger, members of the community of all living beings. So for me, it's clear that the co-founder and president of PETA, who's still responsible in a direct and daily way for the tactics of the organization, is expressing a lot of the same strategic and practical concerns of these interlocking oppressions of sexism and speciesism as we get in other feminist discourse. And this is why I started to be really confused in my own research about this, that we're saying that PETA is a sexist organization. When we're reading about this, and to me it sounds a lot like the types of like feminism and ideas that I think are like really tied to feminism for me. And similarly, in interviews that I conducted with people who work for PETA and people who volunteer for PETA doing the sexy demos, many of them stress the relationship between the oppression of women and the oppression of animals. And a lot of people, I conducted like 6 interviews, talked about how they consider themselves feminists first and were thinking about oppression based on gender before that they were brought to animal rights. And that for them, everyone I asked and talked to who's doing the sexy demos for PETA, for them felt that animal rights is a feminist issue. A lot of them talked about, Ashley Byrne